Hello there. I'm the Moonlit Storyteller, and I'm here to keep you company. I know you've come to this video to unwind, maybe even to help you fall asleep. Before we drift off into that peaceful world, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. That's your way of telling me I'm still here, and I need gentle stories like this. Now, let your mind relax, and let's step into a calm and soothing journey together. The first story. The scent of the hospital always clung stubbornly to my clothes. It wasn't the sharp bite of antiseptic or the sting of rubbing alcohol, as most would assume, but something else, entirely a murky blend of fear, fragile hope, and death. I had spent a decade riding in ambulances, yet that smell never grew any less foreign to me. My name is Mason Reed. None of my friends could understand why a 28-year-old graduate from a prestigious business school would choose to drive an ambulance instead of climbing the corporate ladder. They said I was wasting my potential, but they didn't know about the dream. It was always the same. An old man cloaked in black standing by my grandmother's bedside. He wasn't threatening, he simply waited. And when my grandmother exhaled her final breath, he gently took her hand, and together they faded, vanishing like mist under a rising sun. When I woke from the dream, I knew she was gone. 20 minutes later, the phone rang to confirm it. Since that night, I've believed in the unseen, spiritual realm. Not the crude phantoms of horror films, but something more delicate, an invisible web connecting life and death. I became a paramedic because I wanted to stay close to that threshold, to feel that fragile boundary firsthand, and I would come to witness things that defied all explanation. My first shift should have been routine, shadowing a seasoned medic named Jack Thompson and learning the ropes. Jack was a bear of a man, all thick beard and shrewd, wary eyes hardened by years of tragedies. His reputation for being curt and unwelcoming to rookies was well known. "Reed, right?" he said as I approached the rig. "Yeah, Mason Reed," I replied. "I don't care about your middle name. Tell Meadow you believe in ghosts." The question threw me off balance. It wasn't the sort of thing I expected on my first day. "I guess I think some things can't be explained," I answered cautiously. Jack stared at me, waiting. "I do," I finally said. "I believe." A rare, fleeting smile tugged at his lips. "Good," he said, "because tonight, you're going to meet one." I climbed into the passenger seat, doing my best to stay calm. Jack said nothing more, and for hours, the shift passed without incident. A heart attack patient stabilized before our arrival. A child with a high fever. A minor fender bender without injuries. It was nearly 4:00 a.m. when the radio crackled to life. Unit 27, respond to 42 Oakwood Drive. Elderly female reporting shortness of breath. Code 3. Jack sighed heavily. "That address again," he muttered. "Is there a problem?" I asked. "You'll see," he said. We pulled up to a decaying Victorian house, surrounded by rotting picket fences and wild, untamed grass. Every window was dark, lifeless. "You sure this is the right place?" I asked as we stepped out. "Positive." "12th time in 2 years?" Jack said. "And every time, it's the same story, a call about an old woman who can't breathe. We show up, no one answers the door, but it's never locked. We go inside, head upstairs, down the hall to the last room on the right." Jack paused, watching me carefully. "And there's no one there," he finished. "Not exactly," he added. Jack explained that each visit, they found a corpsean ancient woman, shriveled and desiccated as if she'd been dead for weeks. Yet whenever the police were called, they found nothing. No body, no trace of death. Only an empty room. A shiver crawled down my spine. "And it's always the same," Jack said grimly, stepping toward the house. "Let's see if the 12th time's any different." I followed, clutching the medical bag tightly. The front door creaked open with a light push. "Mrs. Reynos," Jack called out. "Emergency services!" No answer. Only the whisper of wind through torn curtains and the groaning of warped floorboards. "Let's move," Jack said, leading the way up the stairs. I wasn't sure what I expected when we reached the last door at the end of the hall. Part of me braced for a corpse. Another part feared Jack might be setting me up for a cruel joke. But when the door swung open, I saw a Haran elderly woman sitting on the bed, dressed in a faded white nightgown. She wasn't looking at Jack. Her clouded gray eyes locked onto me, seeing far deeper than my skin. "You finally came," she said, her voice as soft as a breeze. "I've been waiting for you." Jack stood frozen beside me, his mouth agape. "She's never spoken before," he whispered. Drawn by instinct and training, I moved toward her. "Mrs. Reynos, are you having trouble breathing?" I asked. She ignored the question, her gaze never wavering. "You'll witness many things others can't," she said. I stopped, feeling like my feet were glued to the floor. "How do you know my name?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. A faint, sorrowful smile crossed her lips. "Because I've been waiting for you, not today, not tomorrow, but one day, you'll be the last person I meet." And then, right before our eyes, she faded away, not in any dramatic, ghostly fashion, but simply evaporating like mist under the morning sun. She was gone. Jack and I stood there in stunned silence until he finally turned to me. "Welcome to the job, Mason Reed," he said. "This is only the beginning." And he was right. It was only the first of many stories I would gather, tales from the fragile edge where life brushes against death, witnessed from behind the wheel of an ambulance. The second story. After my first shift, I didn't see Jack Thompson again for 3 weeks. My coworkers mentioned that he had taken an extended leave for personal reasons. When I brought up the house on Oakwood Street, no one could meet my eyes. Apparently, it was an unspoken test for new employees. Thompson would bring them there to gauge their reactions. Sam, a nurse who had been around for 6 years, told me that some people quit the day after visiting. "But do you believe it?" I asked him about the old woman. Sam shrugged. "Everyone experiences something different there," he said. "I didn't see anything, but others heard whispers. And you?" I didn't tell him exactly what I had witnessed. There's a fine line between being seen as sensitive to the supernatural and being considered crazy, not something I wanted to cross in my first month. "Just a strange feeling," I said. Sam patted my shoulder. "So, you're staying?" "I'm staying," I answered. That night marked my 30th shift, and for the first time, I was assigned as the main driver. Beside me sat Eric, an experienced paramedic who seemed worn down by the job. It was an unusually quiet night, with only one minor injury call and a case of asthma. "I miss winter," Eric said as we parked at a street corner to grab coffee. "More action back then." "You're the only person I know who likes winter because more people get hurt," I joked. Eric chuckled softly. "I just hate sitting around doing nothing. It gives me too much time to think." The radio interrupted. "Unit 27, report of a male with suicidal intentions at Westlake Bridge. Police en route. Priority 1. Eric set down his coffee. God, I hate these calls. I immediately started the engine and flipped on the siren. Westlake Bridge was an old span over the river, about 50 meters above the water, high enough that a fall would be fatal. We arrived before the police. Under the bridge lights, we saw a lone figure. A man stood outside the railing, holding on by just one hand. "Damn," Eric muttered. "Reed, you know we're supposed to wait for the cops, right?" "Look at him," I said. "He won't last 3 more minutes." Eric was right, the man was swaying, and I could see he was crying. "I'm going to talk to him," I decided. "Call dispatch and tell them we're intervening." Eric nodded as I stepped out into the cold, damp night. The river's murmur below sounded like distant whispering. "Hello," I called out, keeping a safe distance. "My name's Mason. I work with the emergency services." The man turned toward me. He looked about 40, with scruffy facial hair and bloodshot eyes from crying, drinking, or both. "Get away!" he yelled. "Don't come closer!" "I'll stay right here," I assured him. "I just want to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," he sobbed. "It's too late." "It's never too late," I said, inching closer. Whatever you're going through, we can figure it out. He laughed bitterly. You don't understand. I killed them. I killed all of them. My body tensed. This wasn't a typical suicide. We might be dealing with a desperate killer. Who? I asked carefully. What happened? My family, he whispered, his voice breaking. My wife. My kids. I glanced back at the ambulance where Eric was speaking into the radio. It wasn't on purpose, the man continued. I didn't see the truck. I was so tired after my night shift. I just closed my eyes for a second. He broke down sobbing. Then it clicked, a car accident. Was it a crash? I asked. When? 2 weeks ago, he said. I was driving. Everyone was asleep. I blinked. Just for a moment, and when I woke up, I was in the hospital. They told me I was the only one who survived. I remembered the accident. A sedan had collided with a truck on the highway. 3 dead at the scene. I'm sorry, I said honestly. It was a horrible accident. I can't live with it, he whispered. They're everywhere. I see them every night standing by my bed, staring at me. My son. He keeps asking why I fell asleep. I swallowed hard. You mean, you actually see them? Your wife and kids? They won't leave me alone, he said, glancing down at the black water below. I have to go be with them. I realized then that this wasn't just guilt. He was being haunted. Whether real or imagined didn't matter. For him, it was real. Listen, I said gently, I don't know if they're really there, but if they are, I know they wouldn't want you to do this. He turned to look at me, eyes wide. In my work, I've seen strange things, I continued. Sometimes, the dead don't come back to punish us. Sometimes, they just have unfinished business. Maybe they need you to keep living for them. You believe me? He asked, astonished. I believe you, I said with all my heart, and I think there's a way to help you, to help them. In that moment, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes, and that was all I needed. I reached out my hand. Come back with me. We'll find someone who can help you talk to them, understand what they need. After a long, painful pause, he nodded and grabbed my hand. 3 months later, I received a letter. Inside was a simple thank you card and a photo. The same man, now clean-shaven and looking healthier, standing beside his family's graves, placing fresh flowers. On the back of the photo, he had written, "They don't visit me anymore. I think they've forgiven me. Thank you for believing." It was one of those rare moments in my career when I knew, without a doubt, that I had truly saved a life. Still, I sometimes wonder if he really saw them, or if guilt alone had conjured those visions. In my line of work, the boundary between hallucination and the afterlife often blurs. But sometimes, believing whether it's real or not is the only thing that keeps us alive. The third story. Do you believe in hell, Reed? Sarah, the new nurse on our team, shattered the heavy silence of the night shift. Almost a year had passed since the incident on the crane, and I had become a vital part of the crew. Starting the shift with philosophy, are we? I joked, checking the equipment in the ambulance. Sarah shrugged casually. Just curious. People say you're sensitive to strange things. I'm not sure about hell, I admitted honestly, but I think some people carry their own versions of it inside them. Sarah gave me a measuring look. You talk like a poet, Reed. We both laughed, just as the radio crackled to life. Unit 14, we have a call from Riverside Psychiatric Center. Male patient, 35 years old, self-inflicted injuries. Code 2. Perfect, Sarah muttered, buckling her seatbelt. I hate calls from that place. Why's that? I asked, starting the engine. Because you can't always tell who really needs help and who's just pretending. I stayed quiet. Sarah was an excellent nurse, but she hadn't yet seen enough of what true madness could look like. Me? I'd always believed that some so-called lunatics simply glimpsed a reality the rest of us were blind to. Riverside loomed ahead, an ancient building with heavy doors and dim, endless corridors. A nurse met us at the entrance. Thanks for coming so quickly, she said, leading us down those strangely silent halls. It's Daniel Mercer. He's been here 3 years for schizophrenia, usually very stable. But tonight, she shook her head. He tore at his own throat with his fingernails. Did he say anything? Sarah asked, already preparing supplies. That's the problem, the nurse replied grimly. He can't speak. He tore his throat trying to pull them out. Sarah and I exchanged a glance. Such things weren't unheard of in schizophrenia. Hallucinations could drive people to horrific acts. But the moment we entered the room, I knew this would stay with me forever. Daniel Mercera, thin man with tangled brown hair, was being restrained on the bed by two exhausted security guards. His chest and neck were slick with blood from deep, angry scratches. Yet it wasn't the injuries that struck me motionless, it was the clarity, the raw terror, the desperate pleading in his eyes. Sarah immediately pulled on gloves and began assessing the wounds. Thankfully, no arteries had been hit, but the injuries were bad enough to need urgent stitches. I moved to the other side of the bed and nodded at the guards. I'll secure his arms so she can work, I offered. Gratefully, they stepped back, clearly worn down by the struggle. I took Daniel's hand, ready for a fight, but he didn't resist. Instead, he stared straight into my eyes, and a chill settled deep in my bones. Hi, Daniel, I said softly. I'm Mason. We're here to help, okay? He tried to respond, but only managed a broken rasp. Don't try to talk, I soothed him. Let's take care of those wounds first. Sarah cleaned the torn skin carefully, while Daniel, trembling slightly, never broke eye contact with me. Slowly, he raised a hand, instantly putting all of us on guard. But all he did was point to his ear, then to mine, and mimed someone whispering. You're hearing something? I asked. Daniel nodded urgently, then tapped at his damaged throat again. Another desperate nod. The nurse sighed. It's just part of his delusion. He's always talked about hearing voices. Yet something about the intensity in Daniel's gaze, so lucid, so sharp, made it impossible for me to dismiss him. You want to tell me something? I asked. Daniel's eyes brimmed with tears as he nodded again. Sarah, how much longer? I called. At least 10 minutes for a proper dressing, she answered, frowning. We'll need to take him to the hospital for stitches after that. Turning back to Daniel, I asked, Can you write? He nodded frantically. I asked the nurse for paper and a pen. When she returned, I positioned the paper so Daniel could write despite his injuries. Hands trembling, he began to scribble. They're real. They're trapped in the walls. The nurse gave an exasperated sigh. Part of his usual delusion. He believes there are people hidden inside the walls. But Daniel kept writing, the pen tearing through the paper with sheer force. I hear them when I'm off my meds. They cry. They need me. I glanced around the room, an aging chamber of white-painted brick tucked in a remote corner of the decrepit building. How old is this place? I asked the nurse. Over a century, she replied. It was a tuberculosis hospital before it became a psych center in the 50s. An unsettling thought crept into my mind. Any particular history to this room? The nurse frowned slightly. Not really. We rarely use theating's broken. Daniel's only here because the main wing's under renovation. Sarah finished wrapping Daniel's wounds. Reed, we need to move him, she said, trying to mask her discomfort. But I wasn't ready to leave. Something wasn't right. Sarah, can you prep the ambulance? I'll stay with him for another minute. She hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Just be careful. Don't let him hurt himself any further. When she left, I turned back toward Daniel, who was scribbling something frantically. He was pointing toward the wall of the secret room where he had been confined. What is he talking about? I asked the nurse. She shook her head. Just one of his delusions, she said. He always believes someone is trapped somewhere. I stared at the wall. Daniel had indicated a solid whitewashed surface made of bricks. Yet something gnawed at me. The dimensions of this room didn't quite align with the overall layout of the building I'd seen while walking down the hallway. I moved closer and tapped the wall lightly. It sounded hollow. Does anyone know the actual structure of this building? I asked. The nurse simply shrugged. I just work here. Because, I said cautiously, not wanting to sound like one of the patients, I think Daniel might be right. In older buildings, it wasn't unusual for false walls to be erected. sometimes hiding entire unused spaces. The nurse looked skeptical, but an older security guard, silent until now, finally spoke up. "There's some history here," he said. "Back when this was a tuberculosis hospital, they used to isolate hopeless cases in small rooms. Sometimes they'd be forgotten." I caught Daniel's eye. He nodded urgently. "I think we should investigate," I said. 2 days later, a short article appeared in the local newspaper. "Horrific discovery at former mental hospital. The remains of wartime patients found sealed behind a wall." The report described how a hidden space had been uncovered behind the very wall in Daniel's room, a cramped cell where patients, abandoned in the 1950s, had died slowly and in agony, likely screaming for help until their voices gave out. Daniel was relocated to another facility for reassessment. His new diagnosis was no longer schizophrenia, but rather a form of extrasensory perception and ability to hear voices of the departed. When I visited him a month later, he seemed much stronger. His voice had returned, rough but steady, and he smiled when he saw me. "Thank you for believing me," he said hoarsely. "No one ever did. They just gave me pills to silence the voices." "You don't hear them anymore?" I asked. Daniel shook his head. "No, they found peace. But sometimes, I still hear others from faraway places." I had no words for a moment. Maybe he wasn't insane. Maybe he bore a terrible gift, the ability to hear cries no one else could. "If you ever hear something again," I told him, "call me. Don't hurt yourself anymore." Daniel nodded. And as I left, I couldn't help but wonder, how many others like him are out there, misdiagnosed, misunderstood, trying to tell us about a reality we refuse to see? Sometimes the only difference between madness and a gift is someone willing to listen. The fourth story. There are emergency calls that leave me feeling powerless, not because I can't save someone, but because the deepest wounds aren't always physical. That shift started off like any other. I was paired with Kevin, a new nurse whose enthusiasm sometimes bordered on annoying. He was always smiling, constantly sharing stories about his young family, a pregnant wife, and a lively 3-year-old daughter. "Reed, can you imagine? Yesterday she said she wants to be a superhero when she grows up." Kevin chuckled. "When I told her girls can't be superheroes, she cried for half an hour." I offered a polite smile. After nearly 2 years driving ambulances, I had heard plenty of my coworkers' stories about their kids. "You should pay a tax for how little you care about children," Kevin teased. "I do care," I protested. "I just see them differently." "What do you mean?" he asked, frowning. "Kids are more sensitive than adults," I said, eyes fixed on the road. "They pick up on things we don't even notice. Sometimes, that's unsettling." Kevin raised an eyebrow. "Right. I forgot you're one of those people who believes in ghosts." I was about to respond when the radio crackled to life. "Unit 27, emergency call at Pine Hollow Apartments, number 42. 6-year-old girl with serious head injury. Code 1. "Shit," Kevin muttered, all humor draining from his face. Pediatric calls were always the toughest. I hit the sirens and accelerated. Code 1 meant critical every second counted. Pine Hollow was a rundown apartment block in one of the city's poorest neighborhoods. A woman in a bathrobe, her eyes bloodshot and frantic, waved us down as we pulled up. "Hurry!" she cried. "She's in the bathroom!" Clearly, she was in full-blown panic. Kevin and I grabbed our equipment and followed her through a messy, cramped apartment that reeked of mildew and alcohol. "What happened?" Kevin asked as we hurried toward the bathroom. She fell," the woman stammered. "I was asleep. I heard a loud noise." When we entered the tiny bathroom, the scene before us froze us in place. A fragile little blonde girl lay motionless on the floor, a dark pool of blood spreading around her head. She wore a faded pink nightgown, and her skin was so pale it was almost translucent. Kevin dropped to his knees to check her pulse and pupils while I readied the emergency gear. "What's her name?" I asked the woman. "Lil," she whispered, leaning heavily against the doorframe, trembling. "Lily Carter," she added. Kevin glanced up, his face grim. Severe head trauma, likely brain injury, weak pulse. We need to move now. We carefully placed Lily onto a stretcher, securing her neck and head, and rushed her out to the ambulance. During the process, I couldn't help but notice the faded bruises scattered across her arms and legs, injuries that didn't match a simple bathroom fall. "Are you her mother?" I asked as we loaded Lily into the vehicle. "Niece," the woman muttered. "My sister died last year. I've been taking care of Lily." "You're coming with us?" I pressed. She hesitated. "I need to change first." "No time," I said firmly. "If you want to come, it has to be now." Reluctantly, she climbed into the ambulance, and I sped toward the hospital while Kevin worked desperately to stabilize Lily in the back. At the hospital, everything unfolded at a dizzying pace. Lily was rushed straight into the emergency room while we stayed back to complete the intake forms with the nurse. I leaned closer and whispered to her that the injuries didn't match the guardian's story. I had noticed old bruises as well. The nurse gave a knowing nod. "We'll report this to Child Protective Services," she said. Just as we were about to leave, a doctor came running from the ER, his face pale. "Where did you find that little girl?" he demanded urgently. "An apartment at Pine Hollow," Kevin answered, his voice wary. "Is something wrong? And are you sure her name is Lily Carter?" "That's the name the guardian gave us," I added, confused. The doctor swallowed hard before replying. "Because Lily Carter, 6 years old, was already brought into our morgue about 3 hours ago. She died at the scene from head trauma, a victim of domestic violence." Kevin and I stood frozen in the hallway, struggling to process what we just heard. "But that's impossible," Kevin stammered. "We just saved her. You saved someone," the doctor said grimly. "But not Lily Carter." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "Where's the woman who came with us?" I asked sharply. But when we turned around, both the woman and any trace of her were gone. After 3 hours of police questioning, Kevin and I were finally allowed to leave. We climbed back into the ambulance, both too stunned to speak. It wasn't until we pulled out of the hospital parking lot that Kevin broke the silence. Who do you think we actually saved?" he asked hesitantly. I didn't answer right away. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? "Did you notice her eyes?" I asked instead. "Her eyes? She was unconscious the whole time, wasn't she?" "No," I said quietly. She opened her eyes for a moment when we lifted her onto the stretcher. They were the bluest eyes I've ever seen. It was like they glowed from inside. Kevin stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Reed, what the hell are you saying?" I sighed. I think we saved Lily's soul." Kevin gawked at me in disbelief. "Don't be ridiculous. Can you come up with a better explanation?" I challenged him. A dead child in a bathroom, a woman maybe her killer calls 911. We arrive. We find a girl alive, bleeding, tangible, and then both she and the woman vanish at the hospital. "But we touched her, Reed," Kevin insisted. "She had a pulse. She was real." "I'm not saying it makes sense," I admitted. "I'm just telling you what I believe." Kevin sat in silence for a long while before muttering, "If it really was Lily's spirit, how could we see and touch her?" "Maybe because she needed help," I said softly. "Not her body that was already gone, but her spirit. Maybe she needed someone to get her to a place where she could finally let go." "And the woman?" Kevin asked. I shook my head. "I don't know. Maybe it was an illusion, or maybe Lily's spirit was strong enough to manifest her greatest fear." Kevin turned to look out the window. "I'm not putting this in the report," he said firmly. "Me neither," I agreed. A week later, the police arrested the sister of Lily's mother for murder. They uncovered evidence that she had been abusing Lily for months before finally killing her in a drunken rage. On the day of the hearing, I visited Lily's grave in the city cemetery. It was a small, simple stone that read, "Lily Carter, 2018-2024. Our little angel has come home." I laid a small bouquet of flowers at the headstone, and as I did, A soft breeze brushed past me. For a fleeting moment, I could have sworn I heard a child's laughter. "Hello, Lily," I whispered. "You're safe now." I never told anyone, not even Kevin, about what really happened that night. Some experiences are too strange, too sacred to share. But from that day on, I paid special attention whenever a call involved a child. Because in my line of work, sometimes it's not just the living who need saving sometimes, it's the ones who've already passed. The fifth story. Some places seem almost designed to attract darkness. I'm not talking about obvious sites like hospitals or morgues, I mean regular spots. Apartments, street corners, even a quiet patch of parkland, where sorrow seems to endlessly return. For our city's emergency team, that place was apartment 13 at the Westview building. Again? Diana, the emergency nurse on shift with me that day, groaned when she heard the address come through the radio. "That's the third time this month." I nodded, an uneasy familiarity settling over me as I steered the ambulance toward the aging apartment block downtown. In 3 years on the job, I had responded to calls from apartment 13 at least 10 times, and never for anything good. "You know anything about the history of that unit?" Diana asked as we parked out front. "Not much," I replied. "Just that bad things always seem to happen there whenever we're called." Apartment 13 was located on the B level of Westview, a crumbling mid-century building with faded red brick walls and elevators that were more often broken than working. Today was no different. A maintenance in progress sign hung on the elevator door. "Perfect," Diana muttered under her breath, as we hefted our heavy medical bags and started up the stairs. By the time we reached the 4th floor, a pale, middle-aged woman was anxiously waiting outside apartment 13. "Thank God you're here," she stammered. "He's in the bedroom. I don't know what happened. He was just sleeping and then started seizing and vomiting blood." Diana and I exchanged a quick, knowing glance before stepping inside. Apartment 13 didn't look particularly dirty or messy. In fact, it was quite clean and tastefully decorated. Yet there was something about the air, thick, oppressive, and a strange, sickly sweet scent, almost like overripe fruit, but not exactly. We found the patient, a man in his 40s, sprawled on the bed, lightly convulsing. A dark red stain had soaked into the pillow beside him, and his skin had taken on a disturbing grayish tone. Diana immediately set to work checking his vitals, while I got the oxygen tank and medication bag ready. "Your husband?" I asked, the nervous woman hovering by the doorway. "Boyfriend," she corrected. "We just moved in 2 months ago. Any medical history? Is he taking any meds?" I pressed. She shook her head. "Mike's always been healthy. He even ran a marathon last year." I nodded and hurried back to assist Diana, who was working fast to stabilize him. "Weak pulse, low blood pressure, irregular breathing," she called out grimly. "We need to move him now." As we prepared to transfer Mike onto the stretcher, his eyes suddenly snapped open, but he wasn't looking at us. His gaze locked onto an empty corner of the ceiling. "Please," he rasped, blood thickening his voice. "Don't." "Mike!" his girlfriend cried out in panic. "Mike, can you hear me?" But it was as if he didn't even register her. His stare remained fixed, and then, in a voice not his own deeper, rougher, he said, "Who's next?" His eyes closed immediately after, and his body went into violent convulsions. "We have to go now," Diana yelled. We rushed him onto the stretcher and down the stairs as fast as we could. On the way to the hospital, Mike's condition worsened. He kept vomiting blood, and Diana had to intubate him to keep his airway open. "Reed," she called urgently from the back. "Floor it." I flipped on the siren and accelerated, the heavy feeling of dread weighing down my chest. We had been through this with apartment 13 far too many times. Mike didn't make it. He went into cardiac arrest just as we arrived at the hospital, and despite every effort, the trauma team couldn't bring him back. The official cause of death was listed as acute gastrointestinal bleeding of unknown origin. About a week later, during a late shift, I ran into Diana again in the break room at the emergency station. She was hunched over a stack of old documents, her face tight with tension. "You're not going to believe this," she said as I sat down with my coffee. "I've been digging into the history of apartment 13. "How did you get access to the information?" I asked. Curiosity piqued. "I have a friend who works at the city's archive office. She helped me pull all the police and medical reports tied to that address over the last 5 decades, Diana explained, pushing a bundle of papers toward me. "Take a look at this pattern." I began flipping through the files. Over the span of 50 years, there had been 27 deaths in apartment 13, all related to unexplained internal bleeding. None of the victims were connected in any way, other than the fact that they had all lived there. The incidents occurred roughly every 1 to 2 years. "This can't just be coincidence," I muttered, feeling a chill creep through me. "And that's only scratching the surface," Diana said, turning to another page. "Did you know what the Westview building was originally built on?" I shook my head. "It used to be the site of a World War I field hospital," she continued. "And according to old maps, apartment 13 sits exactly where the main operating room once stood." I stared at her, an uneasy shiver running down my spine. "Are you suggesting—" "I don't know what I'm suggesting," she sighed. "I just know too many people have died there under the same eerie circumstances. And the strangest part is that nearly all of them reported nightmares of being operated on without anesthesia just before they fell ill." "Did Mike's girlfriend ever mention anything about nightmares?" I asked. "Not initially," Diana said. "But when I called her yesterday, she admitted Mike had been suffering from terrible dreams for 2 weeks before he died. He kept dreaming that he was strapped to a surgical table while someone cut into him, and he was fully awake the entire time." He swallowed hard. "Do you think it's some kind of curse? Or maybe a haunting?" Diana shrugged. "I honestly don't know, but if I were working in real estate, I'd make damn sure no one ever moved into that apartment again." 2 months later, another call came in from apartment 13. This time, it was a young woman who had just moved in 3 weeks prior. She showed the same symptoms, vomiting blood, seizures, and just before losing consciousness, she stared at the exact same spot on the ceiling that Mike had fixated on. As we carried her out, I couldn't help but glance up. At first, I saw nothing unusual, but as I looked closer, I spotted a faint crack in the ceiling, one that curved in a way that eerily resembled the blade of a surgical knife. And for just a fleeting second, I could swear I heard a whisper from that very corner. "Who's next?" I never told anyone about that moment. Some things, I believe, are better left unspoken. Yet every time a call comes from apartment 13, I still volunteer to go. Not because I want to witness another tragedy, but because maybe, just maybe, if someone finally acknowledges the truth of that place, the cycle of horror might finally end. Until then, I keep searching for answers. The sixth story. Not every experience I had was terrifying. Sometimes they were simply strange, and often the strangest ones left me with the warmest memories. I first met Mrs. Eleanor on a rainy November night, about 4 years after I started working on the ambulance team. It had been an unusually quiet night shift, with only 2 minor calls during the first 6 hours. Marcus, my partner that evening, had dozed off in the passenger seat when the radio crackled to life. "Unit 27, we have a call from Sunset Hills Nursing Home. Female patient, 93 years old, experiencing shortness of breath, code blue." I tapped Marcus on the shoulder to wake him up. "Rise and shine, sleeping beauty," I teased. Groaning, Marcus stretched and muttered, "I hate night shifts at nursing homes." "Why's that?" I asked, while switching on the siren and accelerating. "Because we always show up too late," he replied, his voice heavy. "The elderly, they know when it's time. They don't call us thinking we can save them. They call because they don't want to face the end alone." I stayed silent. Marcus had been in the field longer than I had, and I couldn't argue with his experience. Sunset Hills was a sprawling 2-story facility on the city outskirts, surrounded by towering oak trees. Despite the late hour, lights shone from many windows, and a nurse was already waiting for us at the entrance. "Thanks for coming," she said, quickly leading us down a quiet hallway to a room at the far end. "This is Mrs. Eleanor Winters," she explained. She's in the final stages of heart failure. We believe this might be the moment." She didn't need to finish. Marcus and I understood immediately. Mrs. Eleanor's room felt different from most nursing home rooms. It was cozy, beautifully decorated. Old black and white photographs lined the walls. Shelves overflowed with books. A vase of fresh flowers sat beside the bed, and a vintage radio played soft classical music in the background. Lying in bed was a frail woman, her white hair neatly braided. Her breathing was shallow and labored, her eyes half closed. Marcus moved to check her vitals while I prepared the monitor. "Mrs. Winters?" Marcus called gently. "I'm Marcus, and this is Mason. We're paramedics. Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing strikingly clear blue eyes, surprisingly sharp for her age. "Of course I can hear you," she answered in a faint but steady voice. "I'm old, not deaf." Marcus chuckled. "My apologies, ma'am. You're having trouble breathing, aren't you?" "A little," she admitted with a slight smile. "But I think the nurse overreacted. I just need a bit of rest." I glanced at the pulse oximeter, 88%. Low, but not immediately life-threatening. "We should still take you to the hospital for a proper checkup," Marcus said, though we both knew it was more kindness than truth. Mrs. Eleanor let out a soft bell-like laugh. "We all know that's not necessary." "I'm ready," she said calmly. Marcus and I exchanged a glance. "In your condition, there's very little we can do," I said gently as I stepped closer. "But we can make you comfortable. Would you like that?" Mrs. Eleanor looked at me, her gaze so intense it seemed to pierce right through me. "You see them too, don't you?" she asked softly. I froze for a moment. "See who?" I asked, my voice quieter. "The ones who have already passed," she said matter-of-factly. "I can always recognize people like you, the ones who have glimpsed the boundary." Marcus shot me a puzzled look, but I didn't meet his eyes. I stayed focused on Mrs. Eleanor and gave a small nod. Her face lit up with a radiant smile. "I thought so," she said. "Tell me, then is anyone waiting for me on the other side?" He swallowed hard. This wasn't a typical conversation for a night shift, but there was something about Mrs. Eleanor, a mix of wisdom and unwavering trust, that made lying impossible. "I don't always see everything," I answered honestly. "Sometimes it's just fleeting glimpses." She nodded, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "But you have seen loved ones coming to welcome those who are leaving, haven't you?" she asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Not always clearly, though. Sometimes it's just a feeling of presence." She sighed in relief. "Good," she whispered. "I hope Harold will be there." She smiled wistfully. "We were married for 62 years before he passed." Meanwhile, Marcus was quietly rechecking her blood pressure, trying not to look uncomfortable with the direction of our conversation. "Harold will be there," I said, with as much certainty as I could muster. I spoke with a certainty that even surprised me. "And I believe your children are waiting for you too," I added. Eleanor's eyes widened. "How do you know about my children?" Realizing I had overstepped, I froze. I didn't know anything about her family. What I had said had simply come to me, as if from somewhere beyond my own conscious thoughts. "I don't know," I admitted softly. "Sometimes I just sense things." Eleanor nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. 3 of them, Elizabeth, Samuel, and little Margaret. They passed away before me in a tragic accident back in 1986. My heart clenched in pain. "I'm so sorry," I murmured. "Don't be," she said, smiling through her tears. "It's been 39 years. And if you say they're here, I believe you." Marcus gently interrupted, his voice soft but professional. "Mrs. Winters, we need to make a decision. Would you like us to take you to the hospital?" Eleanor glanced between Marcus and me, then shook her head. "No, thank you. I'd rather stay here, surrounded by my memories." Marcus nodded understandingly. "I'll speak to the nurse about arranging supportive care," he said before stepping out. I remained by Eleanor's bedside. Her hand, small and dry yet warm, closed around mine. "You're not afraid of it, are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Afraid of what?" I asked. "Moving on," she said simply. "You've seen enough to understand it." I took a moment to think. "I'm not afraid of leaving," I finally said. "But I do fear the sorrow it may cause, not just for the ones leaving, but for those who remain behind." Eleanor nodded sagely. "That's wisdom. But you know, with time, even sorrow becomes a form of comfort. It's proof of how deeply we loved." We sat together in peaceful silence, the soft strains of classical music playing from her old radio. "Do you see anyone else in the room?" she asked suddenly, her voice dreamy. "Right now?" I glanced around, unsure what to expect. At first, there was nothing but the familiar sight of photos, flowers, and worn furniture. But then, in the far corner, I noticed a shimmer in the air, like heat rising from asphalt on a summer day. As I stared harder, the shimmer began to take shape into a tall man, with 3 smaller figures clustered beside him. I began hoarsely. "I think they're here. Harold, and your children." Eleanor closed her eyes, a serene smile spreading across her face. "Good," she whispered. "Then I'm ready." I squeezed her hand gently. "Would you like me to stay with you?" I asked. "If you don't mind," she whispered. "Just for a little while." I nodded and remained at her side, still holding her hand. Marcus returned with a nurse in tow, but I motioned for them to wait quietly at the door. Eleanor took in a deep, trembling breath, then exhaled slowly. Her next breath was softer. The breath after that never came. And yet, in that instant, I could have sworn I saw her, not the frail body on the bed, but a younger, radiant version of herself rise up and walk toward the shimmering figures waiting in the corner. The tall man opened his arms wide, and Eleanor stepped into them, with the 3 smaller figures gathering around. For one perfect moment, I saw them all together again, family, reunited and bathed in a warm, golden light not of this world. And then, just as quickly, they faded, leaving only Eleanor's peaceful form on the bed, her face aglow with a soft, contented smile. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, as we left the nursing home, the paperwork finally complete. "Yeah," I replied, my eyes lifted to the starry sky. "Sometimes," I said softly, "this job isn't really about saving lives. Sometimes it's about bearing witness." Marcus gave me a curious look, but didn't press further, and I didn't try to explain. How could I possibly describe the beauty of that moment, seeing Eleanor find her family again? Not all stories of those who have passed are meant to unsettle you. Sometimes, they remind you that love transcends everything. And for me, that's the most profoundly beautiful part of what we do. The 7th story takes place in a city during winter, which holds a unique kind of beauty, yet also reveals its harshness. The flickering lights along the main streets paint a scene straight out of a storybook, but for the homeless, the plummeting temperatures become a deadly threat. As an emergency responder, winter is always the busiest season. Slippery roads lead to car accidents, the elderly fall and break bones on frozen sidewalks, and of course, homeless individuals are fighting for their lives against the intense cold. That night in December was particularly brutal, with temperatures dropping to 15 degrees C. I was paired with Olivia, an experienced paramedic who had been in the field for nearly 2 decades. Unlike most of my colleagues, Olivia never mocked my beliefs in the spiritual world. In fact, at times, I got the sense that she, too, could sense things beyond the physical realm, even if she never admitted it. "Tonight is going to be hell," Olivia muttered as we began our shift. "Whenever the temperature drops below 1 to 4 C, we lose at least one person." I nodded solemnly, knowing she was right. Despite the shelters and the city's outreach efforts, there were always those who fell through the cracks. The first 2 hours were relatively calm, with only a minor car accident and a case of shortness of breath in an elderly person. But when the clock struck 11, the radio crackled to life. "Unit 27, we have a call from Riverside Park, unresponsive homeless individual. Possible hypothermia. Code 2. It sounded dire. Olivia shook her head as I switched on the sirens and headed toward the park. Who would be out there in the park at this hour? She muttered. Maybe they don't have any other option, I replied. Or perhaps they don't even realize the danger. Alcohol, drugs, mental illness, they can all impair judgment. Olivia nodded, her gaze distant as snowflakes softly fell outside the window. We found him on a bench near the south entrance of Riverside Park. A thin, middle-aged man wearing several layers of tattered clothes, curled up like a shrimp. A couple walking late had spotted him and called 911. We only saw him by chance, the woman explained, shivering in her coat. At first, we thought he was just sleeping, but when we got closer, you did the right thing calling us, Olivia reassured the couple. You can go now. We'll take it from here. Once they left, Olivia and I quickly checked on the man. He was still breathing, but his breaths were shallow and slow. His skin was cold and pale, and he didn't respond when we called to him or shook him. Olivia diagnosed severe hypothermia as she checked his temperature. We need to move him now, she said. We carefully lifted the man onto the stretcher, wrapped him in blankets to retain heat, and rushed him to the ambulance. Olivia began administering fluids while I cranked up the heating in the back of the vehicle. He didn't have any identification, Olivia noted after checking his coat pockets. As I started the engine, I noticed something strange. Even though we had wrapped him in blankets, the man was shaking violently from the waist up, while his legs were completely still. Olivia, do you notice something odd? I asked. She glanced up from her work, puzzled. What do you mean? His upper body is trembling, but his legs aren't moving at all, I explained. Olivia furrowed her brow, pulling the blankets back to examine him. It could be trauma to the spine. Let's check for injuries. I quickly checked, but there were no signs of trauma. Olivia began cutting away the man's clothing to examine him more thoroughly. That's when we discovered it. His legs. Not only were they cold and pale, but they were also stiff and a dark purple color, completely frozen. Oh my God, Olivia gasped. This is end-stage hypothermia with frostbite. We need to get him to the hospital fast. I drove as quickly as possible, navigating the icy roads, while Olivia did her best to stabilize the patient. But we both knew the prognosis was grim. If his legs were frozen solid, it might already be too late. At the hospital, the emergency doctors took over immediately. After handing over the patient and finishing the paperwork, Olivia and I were about to leave when one of the nurses called us back. He's awake, she said, and he's asking about both of you. Olivia and I exchanged surprised looks and followed the nurse into the emergency room. The homeless man was lying in bed, surrounded by medical equipment, looking remarkably alert. You're the ones who found me, he said, his voice raspy. Yes, Olivia nodded. How are you feeling? Warmer? He smiled weakly. Thanks for saving me. It's our job, I replied. What's your name? James, he answered. James Kowalski. I gently asked, how long were you outside in the cold? A strange look crossed his face. I'm not sure. I remember sitting down to rest for a bit. I was on my way to the shelter. Can you feel your legs? Olivia asked bluntly. James looked down at his legs, now covered with a special blanket. No, he admitted. It's been days. I looked at Olivia before turning back to James. You've been unable to feel your legs for days, and yet you didn't seek help? James stared out the window, watching the snow continue to fall. I thought they'd already gone, he murmured. Gone? Olivia asked, clearly concerned he might be hallucinating due to the severe hypothermia. They aren't mine anymore, James said, his voice distant. They're hers. Who is she? I asked, feeling an odd sensation creeping up. The woman under the bridge, James replied, locking eyes with me. She died years ago, frozen to death on a night like this. No one found her until the snow melted. A chill ran down my spine. How do you know about her? I asked. I meet her in my dreams every night, James whispered. She's always so cold, and she says she needs legs to get where she belongs. Olivia's grip tightened on my arm, a silent signal that we should leave. But I couldn't bring myself to go. There was something in James's story that made me need to listen. So, You lent her your legs? I asked softly. James nodded, a tear sliding down his cheek. I didn't mean to, but every night I feel her pulling them farther, making them colder. And last night, she smiled and said, "Thank you. Now I can go home." A doctor entered, interrupting our conversation. "Mr. Kolowski, we need to discuss your condition. I'm afraid we won't be able to save your legs." His voice held a strange acceptance. "I know," James said calmly. The doctor looked surprised but nodded slowly. "Yes, we'll need to perform surgery to prevent the spread of necrosis." "Okay," James replied simply. "At least the rest of me is still alive." As we left the room to allow the doctor to work, Olivia grabbed my arm. "You don't really believe his story, do you?" she asked. I glanced back through the window at James, who was staring out, an eerily peaceful expression on his face. "I don't know what to believe," I admitted. "But one thing I do know for sure is that, about 5 years ago, a homeless woman did indeed die of frostbite under the Riverside Bridge. I remember it because it was one of my first calls. We arrived too late." Olivia stared at me. "It could just be a coincidence. He might have read about it in the news." I nodded, but something still felt off. When I checked him in the ambulance, I couldn't help but notice his legs. They looked almost feminine, smaller and more delicate than the rest of his body. Olivia shook her head. "Reed, sometimes I don't know what goes on in your mind." I smiled. "Trust me, I often wonder the same thing myself." 2 weeks later, I returned to the hospital to check on James's progress. The nurse told me that his surgery had been successful, and he was recovering remarkably well. "Most people would be depressed after losing their legs, but he says it was a fair trade," she said. "A trade?" I asked. "Yes, he says he lent his legs to someone so they could go home, and in return, he gets to live." "Strange," I murmured, nodding but saying nothing more. As I left the hospital, an odd compulsion led me to visit the Riverside Park. The snow had melted, and spring was beginning to emerge. A small wildflower was growing precisely where the woman's body had been found 5 years ago. It was a pure white flower, one I didn't recognize. As I knelt to take a closer look, I could have sworn I heard soft footsteps moving away, and felt a cold hand briefly touch my shoulder before vanishing. Sometimes the strangest stories aren't about ghosts or supernatural occurrences. Sometimes they're about the connections between lost souls, both living and dead, and how they find peace in ways we can't understand. I've never shared this story with any of my colleagues, but every winter, I pay special attention to the homeless sitting alone in the bitter cold. Because sometimes, it's not just the cold that's taking their lives. Sometimes, something else is pulling them into the darkness. The 8th story. Every neighborhood has its stories. Some are just whispers passed down from neighbor to neighbor, filled with tales of mysterious houses or events long forgotten. Many of these stories are simply products of our imagination, shaped by the fear of the unknown. But sometimes, just sometimes, those stories turn out to be true. Forest Glen is one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city, known for its Victorian-style houses and their history, dating back to the late 1800s. The streets are lined with towering trees, their branches heavy with age, and the houses, with their manicured gardens, speak of another time. It's a peaceful place, but one that I dread receiving calls from at night. One weekend, I found myself working a late-night shift with Ryan, a new nurse who was still in his first year on the job. He was full of energy, always trying to make light of things. "Hey, Reed," Ryan said as we sat in the ambulance, sipping coffee and waiting for our next call. "Do you believe in things like curses?" I glanced at him, puzzled. "Why do you ask?" "I don't know," he shrugged. "People say you're the kind of person who picks up on strange vibes." I chuckled softly. "I wouldn't call them curses, more like places that hold memories, that carry an energy from the past." Ryan looked thoughtful for a moment. "Like haunted houses?" "Not exactly," I replied. "Not ghosts moving things around, but more like echoes, memories that stick around, lingering in the walls." Just then, the radio crackled. Unit 27. We've got a call from 42 Maple Street in Forest Glen. Female, around 70 years old, reports shortness of breath and chest pain. Code 2. A shiver ran down my spine. 42 Maple. An address I knew too well, but one I'd never visited. Forest Glen, I muttered, starting the engine. Ryan gave me a sideways glance. You don't like that neighborhood? It's not the neighborhood, I replied, my voice low. It's the house. Ryan looked at me with curiosity. What's wrong with the house? I hesitated. There've been a few calls from that address. Always the Samin elderly woman with breathing problems. Always at night. So, it's a regular thing? Ryan asked. That's the strange part, I said, turning onto the street. Every time we've gone, there's never anyone there. 42 Maple Street was an old Victorian house, its pale blue paint faded by time, with a white trim that had seen better days. It stood alone at the end of the street, its windows dark, the oak trees casting long shadows over the yard. No lights? Ryan commented as we parked. They're never on. I nodded, grabbing our gear. We approached the front door, an old oak with a stained glass window shaped like a crescent moon. I rang the doorbell, but there was no sound. Maybe it's broken? Ryan suggested. I knocked, the sound echoing in the still night air. No response. Emergency services, I called out. Is anyone home? Silence. Prank call, maybe? Ryan suggested. I shook my head. No, this isn't a prank. I tried the door handle, and to my surprise, it turned. It's unlocked, Ryan said, his voice hesitant. It always is, I muttered as I stepped inside. Stay close and follow me. The house was dark and cold. The air smelled faintly of dust and something older, like forgotten books left to gather age. The beam from our flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing a wide hallway with polished wood floors and portraits hanging on the walls. Faces stared back at us, distant and stern from another time. Is anyone here? Ryan called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. We heard nothing but the sound of our own steps. This place doesn't seem like it's been lived in for years, Ryan remarked, shining his light on the thick dust covering a table. This way, I said, leading him up the stairs. The steps creaked beneath us, each one a protest against our weight. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched out with several closed doors. Which room? Ryan asked, his voice quieter now. At the end, on the right, I said. As we neared the door, I felt the temperature drop sharply. My breath fogged in front of me, the cold settling deep in my bones. It's freezing, Ryan shivered. Why is it so cold? I didn't answer, instead stopping at the door. I reached for the brass doorknob, and it was cold, too cold, almost as if it were burning my hand. Ready? I asked, turning to Ryan. He nodded, his grip tight on the medical bag. With a deep breath, I opened the door. The room inside was large and elegant, with a big oak bed in the center. Thick red curtains covered the windows, and a vintage oil lamp sat on the bedside table, its small flame flickering in the darkness. On the bed lay an elderly woman, still and unmoving, her hands crossed over her chest. Ryan rushed forward, his medical instincts taking over. Ma'am, can you hear me? He called. I moved more slowly, observing carefully. This room was different from the rest of the house in Odust, well-maintained as if frozen in time. Ryan reached the bed and checked the woman's pulse. I can't find a pulse, he said, urgency in his voice. Help me start CPR. But I didn't move. Instead, I gently said, Ryan, look at her closely. Ryan stopped and turned back to the woman on the bed. I saw the recognition dawn in his eyes. The woman wasn't just motionless. Her skin was unnaturally gray, and her face was stiff, not like the face of a living person. Ryan stepped back. She's dead. I spoke softly. She's been dead for a long time. Ryan turned to me, eyes wide in disbelief. But how about the call? Just then, a slow, deliberate knock echoed from downstairs. Ryan nearly jumped out of his skin. Is someone downstairs? I shook my head. No one. But the knocking persisted. Listen, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. This is the 6th time I've been to this house. Every time, it's the same calls in the middle of the night. An empty house, and the woman on that bed. Ryan shook his head, unwilling to accept it. That can't be. If she's dead, then why? Why is she still here? I looked around the room, gathering my thoughts. I don't know the whole story, but from what I've learned, this house belonged to Florence Blackwood. She was a widow, lived alone here since the 1970s after her husband passed away. Ryan pointed at the bed, asking, "Is that her?" I nodded. What's strange is that no one knows when she actually died. The house has been abandoned for years, and there are no living relatives. The knocking came again, louder and more urgent. Then who called the ambulance? Ryan's voice trembled. I stared into the darkness of the room. I think she's still calling for help. Ryan couldn't finish the sentence. You mean her? I wasn't sure. I think she passed away alone, with no one around. And maybe, somehow, she's still calling for help, over and over again. Ryan looked at the woman on the bed, and I could see his initial fear shifting into something else, compassion. That's so sad, he said quietly. I nodded. Yes, it is. We stood in silence for a moment, the knocking still echoing from below as if someone desperately needed attention. What should we do now? Ryan finally asked. I walked over to the bed and gently placed my hand on Florence's cold, stiff hand, but I spoke to her as if she could hear me. Florence, I said softly, we got your call. We're here now. You're not alone anymore. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. You can rest now, I continued. Everything will be all right. A cold gust of wind swept through the room, causing the flame of the oil lamp to flicker. For a brief moment, I could have sworn I saw a figura woman in a white nightgown standing in the corner, watching us with a serene expression. Then the figure vanished, and the room seemed to lighten, as though an invisible burden had been lifted. You've done this before, haven't you? Ryan asked gently. 5 times, I nodded. But it's never had this effect before. Maybe this time's different. How did you know what to say? I shrugged. I don't know. Maybe it's what we all want to hear when we face death, that we're not alone. We reported our findings to the police, and they eventually removed Florence Blackwood's body. According to her property records, she had died in 1992, over 30 years ago, alone in that bedroom. But the most important thing was that there were no more calls from 42 Maple Street after that night. Even though many years have passed, I still find myself going back to that house, not to enter it's been sold and renovated, but to stand outside for a moment, just to make sure Florence has finally found peace. Because in my line of work, some emergency calls never truly end, and sometimes saving someone doesn't mean rescuing them from death, but helping them find peace after they've gone. The 9th story. Humans have a peculiar relationship with mirrors. Since ancient times, these reflective surfaces have been imbued with mystical powers, believed to reveal the soul or even act as portals to other worlds. The superstition that breaking a mirror brings 7 years of bad luck isn't just a harmless myth, and after what I've witnessed, I won't ever underestimate the power of mirrors again. It all started on an ordinary Saturday morning during my nearly 6 years of work in the emergency response team. It was the end of a 24-hour shift, one of those exhausting weekend shifts that run from Saturday morning to Sunday morning. That day, my colleague was Desiree, a seasoned nurse with a serious demeanor and impressively skilled hands. I hate weekend shifts. Desiree grumbled as we sat in the car, drinking coffee and eating donuts for breakfast. All the drunk driving accidents, foolish injuries, and suicides. It's depressing. I finished her sentence adding, statistics show that weekends, especially Saturday nights, are the peak times for desperate acts. Exactly, she agreed, nodding while gazing out the window. It makes me feel helpless. We show up to save lives, but so many people don't want to be saved. I was about to respond when the radio crackled to life. Unit 27, emergency call at 156 Hawthorne Street. 16-year-old female with deep lacerations. Parent reports heavy bleeding. Code 1. We immediately abandoned our breakfast and rushed to the scene. When it involves a young person, especially with serious injuries, every second counts. Hawthorne Street, Desiree mumbled. That's the rich neighborhood. She was right. Hawthorne Street is one of the most expensive areas in the city, with luxurious villas and perfectly manicured lawns. The house at 156 was a large Mediterranean-style home with red-tiled roofs and white stucco walls. A middle-aged man in a bathrobe stood anxiously at the entrance, waving us inside as soon as we parked. "Hurry!" he shouted, his face pale. "My daughter's in the upstairs bathroom!" We grabbed our equipment and hurried up the spacious staircase. Inside, the house was even more impressive than the exterior, with high ceilings, elegant furnishings, and expensive artwork adorning the walls. "My wife found her," the man explained as we hurried upstairs. "She locked herself in the bathroom, and we had to break the door down. There's so much blood." The bathroom door was wide open with signs of forced entry. Inside, a woman was kneeling beside a young girl, pressing a towel against her arm. "Move aside," Desiree instructed as we entered. "We'll take it from here." The woman, likely the mother, reluctantly stepped back, her face covered in blood and tears. "Please save her," she begged. Desiree immediately assessed the situation, while I checked the girl's vitals. The teenager was beautiful, with long black hair lying on the marble bathroom floor in a pool of blood beneath her left arm. But what caught my attention wasn't the wounded, was the shards of broken glass scattered around her. The large mirror on the bathroom wall had been smashed, its fragments sharp and scattered across the floor. One of the larger pieces lay close to the girl's bloodied arm. "Severed the wrist artery," Desiree noted as she examined the injury, but the wound wasn't too deep. "We can handle this." As Desiree began bandaging the wound, I monitored the girl's vital sign. Her pulse was quick but strong, her blood pressure low but stable. She was in shock, but still conscious. "What's your name?" I asked gently, trying to keep her alert. "Mia," she whispered, her wide eyes filled with fear. "Mia, you're in good hands." I reassured her calmly. "Desiree is taking care of your injury, and we're going to get you to the hospital. You'll be fine." Mia stared at me, and for a brief moment, I noticed something odd in her eyes. It wasn't the usual fear, it was a deep panic, as if she were seeing something terrifying right behind me. "Did you break the mirror?" I asked, trying to get her attention. Mia nodded faintly, then whispered something so softly I couldn't hear it. "What did you say?" I leaned in closer. "She won't let me go," Mia whispered, tears falling. "She's pulling me back." I looked toward Desiree, who was focused on the wound, unaware of Mia's words. "Who's pulling you?" I asked softly. "The girl in the mirror," Mia replied, her voice shaking. "She looks like me, but she's not me. And she wants me to stay with her." A chill ran down my spine. I glanced at the broken glass on the floor, and for a split second, I thought I saw a face reflected in one of the shards. It was Mia's face, but with a smile that didn't belong to her. Desiree's voice snapped me back to reality. "I've stopped the bleeding. Let's get her on the stretcher." I shook my head, dismissing the hallucination and refocusing on the task. Together, we carefully placed Mia on the stretcher and prepared to move her to the ambulance. "Can I come with her?" the mother asked, her voice still panicked. "Only one person," Desiree said. "Your husband can follow in another car." As we moved Mia down the hallway, I couldn't help but notice that there were no mirrors in the house. No wall mirrors, no makeup mirrors, not even any reflective surfaces. It was strange, especially for such a luxurious home. On the way to the hospital, Mia's condition stabilized. Desiree sat in the back with her and her mother while I drove. "She'll be fine," I heard Desiree reassuring the mother. "The wound isn't as bad as it looks. With a few stitches and proper care, she'll recover fully." "But it's not the wound that worries me," the mother replied, her voice trembling. "It's why this happened." I glanced in the rearview mirror, trying to listen. Mia's had issues with mirrors ever since she was 13, the mother continued. At first, we thought it was just typical teenage self-consciousness. But then, she started talking about another girl in the mirror. Hallucinations? Desiree asked, her voice professional but with a hint of genuine concern. That's what the doctors said, the mother sighed. They diagnosed her with dissociative disorder. Then it turned into early-onset schizophrenia. She was on medication and therapy, but nothing worked. Eventually, we stopped the treatment. What did you do? Desiree encouraged. We removed all the mirrors from the house, the mother admitted. It seemed extreme, but it worked. Mia stabilized until today. What happened? I asked, unable to suppress my curiosity. We installed a new mirror in the main bathroom yesterday, the mother answered. We thought enough time had passed that maybe Mia had gotten past it. We didn't think she'd use that bathroom. But her voice cracked, and Desiree comforted her, reassuring her that they had done their best. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of the panic in Mia's eyes, and what she had said about the girl in the mirror wanting to pull her in. At the hospital, Mia was handed over to the medical team, and she was taken straight to the emergency room. The doctors quickly assessed the situation and confirmed what Desiree had said: the wound was serious, but not life-threatening. With the right treatment, Mia would fully recover physically. As we were about to leave, I felt an odd compulsion. I had to check on Mia again. While Desiree was finishing paperwork, I snuck into the room where Mia was being treated. She was lying in bed, sedated with painkillers and waiting for the surgeon to come and stitch her up. Her parents were in the hallway talking to a psychiatrist, leaving her alone in the room. "Hi, Mia," I said, walking in. "Just checking on you." She opened her eyes and I noticed that the panic had disappeared. In its place was an incredible clarity. "You're the one who saved me," she said, her voice clearer than before. "One of them," I smiled. "How are you feeling?" She nodded but then lowered her voice. "Do you believe me?" I leaned in closer. "About what?" "The girl in the mirror," she whispered. I hesitated. Following all medical protocols, I should reassure her that it was just a hallucination, a symptom of her condition. But there was something in Mia's eyes, a simple, innocent truth that stopped me from lying. "I believe you," I said softly. "I don't know exactly what's happening with you, but I believe you've seen something." Her face lit up with hope, mixed with fear. "Really? You don't think I'm crazy?" I shook my head. "I think there are things in this world that science can't explain. And I think..." I stopped, unsure whether to say it aloud. But Mia's hopeful, terrified gaze pushed me to continue. "I think there are boundaries between worlds that sometimes become thin. And maybe, just maybe, mirrors are one of the places where those boundaries are weakest." Mia stared at me intently. "So, how do I stop her?" she asked. It was a difficult question, and I wasn't sure if I had the answer. But then something came to me, an old legend I had read in a book on folklore. "Long ago," I said, "people believe that if a being is trying to pull you through a threshold like a mirror, you can stop it by speaking your true name. Not the name people call you, but the name you call yourself deep inside." Mia furrowed her brow. "I don't understand." "Think about it. The girl in the mirror isn't just any girl. She's you, or something that wants to be you. If you call out your true name, the one that is yours and yours alone, you might break that link." I paused. "But it's not easy. You'll need to believe in yourself more than ever before." Mia remained silent, her face reflecting deep concentration. Finally, she spoke. "Thank you." And for the first time since meeting her, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she could find her way back from whatever haunted her. As I left her room and walked down the sterile hospital corridor, I couldn't help but think about what Mia had said, the girl in the mirror. And even though I told her it was a symptom of her illness, I couldn't shake the feeling that sometimes, just sometimes, mirrors might show us more than we're ready to see. I wasn't sure if my advice meant anything or if it would even work. But something in Mia's eyes changed. A flicker of hope, a glimmer of resolve pierced through the fear. "Thank you," she said. And for the first time, I saw her smile. 6 months later, I received a letter at the fire station. Inside, there was a thank you card from Mia and her family, along with a photo of her beaming at her middle school graduation. On the back of the photo, Mia had written that it had worked, and she never went back. Her real name, she wrote, was Ann Jung. I never truly knew what happened to Mia. Whether the girl in the mirror was real or just a manifestation of her psychological struggles that she overcame, I can't say for sure. But I learned one thing. Sometimes belief can be as powerful as any medicine. And sometimes, all we need to defeat the darkness is to recognize the light within ourselves. From then on, I made it a point to take an extra second every morning to look into the mirror, just to be certain that the person staring back at me was truly myself. Maybe it's excessive caution, but in my line of work, I've learned that the world is often stranger than we dare to imagine. And sometimes, when the light hits just right, I wonder if there's another world on the other side of the mirror, where a different version of me is asking the same question. The 10th story. Fire and humanity share a complex relationship. It has given us civilization, warmth, and light. But it is also one of the most destructive forces on Earth. Perhaps that's why when we look at a flame, we feel both captivated and terrified. Throughout my career, I've witnessed too many people become so entranced by fire that they were willing to sacrifice everything for it. I vividly remember one summer night, scorching hot with no breeze. I was on shift with Ethan, an emergency nurse who had been working with our team for about a year. We had just finished responding to a minor heart attack and were heading back to the station when the radio crackled. Unit 27, we have a report of a fire at 78 Blackwood Street. The fire department is en route. Possible entrapment inside. Damn it, Ethan muttered. I hate fires. I understood his sentiment. Nothing is more stressful than waiting outside a burning building, knowing someone might be inside, but being unable to do anything until the firefighters can do their job. When we arrived, flames had already consumed the first floor of the 2-story house. A crowd of neighbors had gathered on the opposite sidewalk, and the sound of sirens was growing louder. Is anyone inside? I asked an older woman, who appeared to be a neighbor. I think so, she replied, eyes wide with fear. Mr. Peterson always has his porch light on at night, but not tonight. I think he's home. Is there anyone else living there? Just Albert. He lives alone since his wife passed away last year. I nodded and turned to Ethan, who was preparing the gear in case we had a patient. There might be an elderly man inside, I said. Be ready for smoke inhalation. The fire trucks arrived, and the fire crew quickly went to work. 2 firefighters in masks entered the building while others began spraying water at the spreading flames. I stood by the truck, feeling the familiar helplessness rise. It's one of the hardest aspects of this job. Sometimes, all you can do is stand there and wait, knowing that every second passing could be the difference between life and death. Then I heard an odd sound cutting through the roar of the fire and the wail of alarms. Laughter. Not the screams I had expected, but a high-pitched, almost musical giggle coming from behind the house. Do you hear that? I asked Ethan. What? The laughter? I nodded, already moving toward the side of the house. Reed, don't, Ethan began, but I had already gone too far to hear the rest. I made my way around the house, staying as far from the fire as I could. Behind the house, there was a small backyard with a large oak tree, and under that tree I saw a figure. An elderly man, sitting on a wooden chair, watching his burning home with a strange smile on his face. Mr. Peterson? I called, stepping closer. The man turned to me, and in the light from the burning house, I could see his gaunt face, hollow eyes, and an almost manic grin. Beautiful, isn't it? He croaked. You need to leave, I said, moving closer to him. I know, he chuckled. I know better than anyone. I stopped, a sense of unease washing over me. He had started the fire. The man kept laughing, his eyes reflecting the flames in a way that made my skin crawl. You need to come with me now, I said more firmly. We need to get you to safety. Safety? He laughed loudly. There's no safety. She's everywhere. She always finds me. Who? I asked, unsure if I really wanted to know. Margaret, he whispered, his gaze distant. My wife. The woman I killed. I stood frozen. This wasn't what I expected when I followed the laughter. Mr. Peterson, I said softly, I think you're in shock. Come with me and we'll get you checked out. She died in the fire, you know, he continued, seemingly unaware of me. Just like this fire. I started it in the bedroom while she was sleeping. She never had a chance. A cold chill ran down my spine. Which fire are you talking about, Mr. Peterson? The one at our old house in Ohio, 30 years ago. They called it an accident, an electrical fault. No one knew. He giggled again, but she knew, he said, his eyes distant. And she never let me go. I looked around, hoping to see Ethan or a police officer. This wasn't a situation I was trained for. Every night, Miss Peterson continued, I hear her laughter. She laughs like it's the biggest joke in the world that I thought I got away, and then I began to smell smoke. Every time there was no fire, I would wake up in the middle of the night, choking, thinking I was burning alive. But tonight, I've decided to end it. If she wants me to burn, then I'll burn. The man suddenly stood, causing me to take a step back. But first, I owe her an apology, he said, staring at the fire. Margaret, he suddenly shouted, I'm coming! Before I could react, he ran toward the burning house. Mr. Peterson! I shouted, chasing after him. But he was surprisingly fast for his age. By the time I was only a few meters from the back door, he had disappeared into the flames. The heat pushed me back, and I stumbled back into the yard, helpless, watching the fire consume the house. At that moment, I heard Ethan's voice calling my name. Reed! Ethan came around the corner of the house with 2 firefighters. What the hell are you doing? We've been looking for you everywhere. Peterson? I gasped, pointing toward the house. He just ran in. He did it on purpose. I couldn't finish my sentence. And Ethan didn't need me to. He grabbed my shoulders and pulled me back, while the 2 firefighters reported over their radios. Evacuate! Evacuate immediately. A voice came from their radio. The house is about to collapse. We quickly retreated to the front of the house, and just moments later, there was a loud explosion as the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and debris. It took nearly 2 hours to fully extinguish the fire, and by morning, they had found Albert Peterson's body in the rubble. I told the police everything he had said, and they informed me they would investigate the fire in Ohio that he mentioned. But it wasn't until 2 weeks later that I learned the full truth. A police detective came to the fire station to speak with me. They had found records of a fire in Ohio from 30 years ago. A house belonging to Albert and Margaret Peterson had burned down one summer night. The initial report said it was an electrical fault, but here's the strange part. Margaret Peterson didn't die in that fire, the detective said. What? I was confused. She wasn't even home that night, the detective continued. In fact, she was the one who reported the fire and claimed that Albert had died in it. I stared at the detective, but clearly, he hadn't died. No, he didn't die. But they found the body of a man in the ruins, the detective said. A man they identified as Albert Peterson based on Margaret's testimony. But now we know it must have been someone else. So, Margaret died 6 years ago in a nursing home in Florida, the detective said. She never remarried and apparently believed her husband had died in that fire 30 years ago. I tried to make sense of it all. So, Albert? Did he kill someone and try to cover it up with the fire? The detective nodded. That's our theory. Maybe a break-in or something similar. He killed that person, set the house on fire, and ran off, making Margaret believe he had died. Then he started a new life, and 30 years later, he killed himself in another fire. I tried to understand the psychology behind it. It seems that way. Perhaps that's why we are both mesmerized and terrified when we look at fire. Because on some primal level, we understand that fire doesn't just destroy, it keeps things. And what it keeps secrets, crimes, restless souls can linger long after the flames have died out. The 11th story. Technology evolves rapidly, and with it, the ways we connect with one another. When I started my career, public payphones were still common on street corners. Now, they have almost disappeared, replaced by smartphones carried by everyone. I've often wondered if those old payphones ever held on to the calls they transmitted, the whispered declarations of love, urgent messages, cries for help. Perhaps, like the walls of an old house, they absorbed and retained the emotions that passed through them. But I never expected one of those phones to call me. It was a cold winter night, about 7 years into my job as an EMT, with Victor, a big guy with a thick black mustache and a grin in his eyes by my side. Even in the worst situations, he maintained a sense of humor. We were heading back to the station after a routine call. A woman had slipped and fallen, but her injuries weren't serious. "Damn, it's freezing," Victor muttered, cranking the heat up in the ambulance. "Do you believe in ghosts?" I glanced at him, confused. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. People say you have a sixth sense for that stuff," he replied. I chuckled. "I'm not sure it's a sixth sense. I just think there are things we can't explain. But ghosts, they're like memories." Victor raised an eyebrow. "You think so?" Before I could answer, the radio crackled to life. "Unit 27, we have an emergency call from a public phone at the corner of NH and Pine. The caller is reporting severe breathing issues. No further details." Victor frowned. "Are there still some of those phones working?" "Apparently," I said, flipping on the siren and making a sharp turn. "Some areas still have them." The NH and Pine intersection is in an older part of the city, mostly small shops and aging apartments. When we arrived, the street was eerily quiet, no surprise, given the time and freezing temperatures. I parked the ambulance near a solitary payphone standing under a streetlight, a relic from a bygone era. "I don't see anyone," Victor said, scanning the area. "They might be in the booth, trying to avoid the cold," I suggested. We grabbed the medical bags and stepped outside into the biting cold. As we approached the phone booth, it was clear no one was inside. "They must have gone somewhere else for warmth," Victor suggested, though I found it odd. The dispatch center can usually distinguish fake calls. After checking the alley and nearby buildings, calling out for anyone in need, we found nothing. "I think we should head back," Victor said, his voice tinged with impatience. But then the phone rang. Victor shot me a strange look. "Is that coming from the payphone?" "It seems so," I replied, even though I knew the dispatch center wouldn't use the payphone itself. I stepped toward the booth, feeling a strange unease creep up on me. Victor started to say something, but I was already opening the door. As I stepped inside, the cold wind was instantly cut off, replaced by an unnerving silence, broken only by the phone's persistent ringing. I hesitated for a moment before picking up the receiver. "Hello." There was no immediate response, just a faint static sound. Then I heard it. It was labored, struggling breathing, the kind of breathless gasps I've heard too many times in my career. "Hello, this is Mason Reed from Emergency Services. Who's calling?" The breathing intensified, and a weak voice struggled to be heard. "Help me, I'm here." I looked outside, where Victor stood, his expression filled with concern. "I'm right here," I said into the phone. "But I don't see you. Can you tell me exactly where you are?" The voice replied in a whisper, "In the payphone." The chills running down my spine were not from the cold. "What's your name?" I asked, though a dreadful suspicion was creeping up. "Lisa. Lisa Warren." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I had read about her in an old article when I first started my job. Lisa Warren, a young woman who had died from a severe asthma attack in 1997, while trying to call for help from a public phone at that very corner. I swallowed hard. "Lisa, what year is it?" There was a long pause, followed by a faint whisper. 1997. My heart nearly stopped. "Lisa, listen to me," I stammered, not sure what to do. "I know you're scared, and I know you're having trouble breathing, but I'm here with you. You're not alone." The voice whispered again. I know. Tell my mom. I love her. I'm not in pain. Tears welled up in my eyes. I will. I promise. There was a faint sigh on the other end. Then silence, complete silence. As though the line was still open, but there was no one left. Lisa? Are you still there? I called out, but there was no response. I slowly set the receiver down and stepped out of the phone booth, my head spinning. Victor was staring at me, his face a mask of concern. Reed, are you okay? Who were you talking to? I didn't know how to begin explaining. I think I just spoke with a ghost. The next day, I did some research on Lisa Warren. She had died on December 15, 1997, exactly 25 years before that phone call. She was 19, a freshman in college, who had died from an asthma attack while trying to call for help from a public phone at the intersection of NH and Pine. With some difficulty, I managed to track down her mother, Ella Warren, now 71 years old and still living in the city. I wasn't sure if she would believe me or even want to speak to me, but I had made a promise. Ella's apartment was small but cozy, filled with pictures of a smiling young woman, Lisa. When I rang the doorbell, I half expected no one to answer, but the door opened, and an elderly woman with silver hair and sharp eyes greeted me. Ms. Warren? I asked. Yes, that's me, she replied. What can I do for you? I'm Mason Reed, an EMT. I need to talk to you about your daughter, Lisa. She didn't slam the door in my face as I feared. Instead, she looked startled, then nodded and invited me inside. I told her everything about the phone call, the voice, and the message Lisa left for her. When I finished, Ela sat silently, holding a cold cup of tea. I expected her to dismiss me or ask me to leave. Instead, she said, "The night Lisa died, I wasn't there. I've always regretted it. I wondered if she was scared, if she was alone." She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "Do you know what yesterday was?" "Yesterday?" I asked gently. 25 years, she replied softly, nodding. I went to visit her grave. I apologized for not being there when she needed me. I smiled faintly. "Lisa wanted you to know she loves you. She's not in pain." Ela wiped her eyes, tears silently streaming down her wrinkled face. "Thank you," she whispered. Before I left, she handed me a framed picture of Lisa from her high school graduation. "She would want you to keep it," she said. "You were there for her when I couldn't be." I've never told anyone else about the phone call, except Victor, who has never spoken of it since. But I still carry Lisa's photo in my wallet as a reminder that sometimes the most important calls we receive don't come from the living. And every time I pass one of those old payphones, I can't help but wonder how many other voices still echo in those wires, waiting for someone brave enough to pick up and say hello. The 12th story. Car accidents are always one of the toughest aspects of my job. There's no way to truly prepare yourself for the sight of crushed cars, shattered glass scattered on the road like malicious diamonds, or worse, the chilling silence from a vehicle that has sustained too much damage. However, there is one accident that has stayed with me all these years, not because it was the most horrifying, though it certainly was, but because of what happened afterward. It was a rainy autumn night, about 8 years into my career as an EMT. My partner that night was Naomi, a talented nurse with an incredible calmness in emergencies. We'd already responded to 2 chest pain calls and a high-risk delivery, with the mother and baby doing fine. Then came the call for a serious crash on Highway 16, about 35 kilometers east. Multiple vehicles were involved, and casualties had been confirmed. Naomi and I exchanged a quick glances. Was going to be bad. "I'll drive," I said, turning on the siren and flashing lights, heading into the stormy night. Highway 16 was one of the main routes out of the city, and in heavy rain, it could turn treacherous quickly. As we approached the scene, the flashing lights of other ambulances, fire trucks, and police cars lit up the night. "Good God," Naomi whispered as we got closer. The scene before us looked like a war zone. At least 5 vehicles, 2 sedans, an SUV, a small truck, and a pickup were scattered across the highway, all severely damaged. Debris covered the wet road, reflecting the emergency lights like a surreal broken mirror. Firefighters were working to free the trapped victims, while medical staff were tending to those already removed from the wreckage. I parked at the designated spot, and we immediately reported to the scene commander, a tired-looking female officer. "Two of you to that SUV," she instructed, pointing to an overturned vehicle. They had just freed a woman in critical condition. We rushed to the SUV, where firemen were pulling a woman from the wreckage. She was in her 30s, with long brown hair and pale skin, bleeding from a deep wound on her head. Naomi quickly began assessing her while I helped stabilize her neck. Her name was Claire Thomas, a firefighter told us. Weak pulse, low blood pressure, suspected brain injury, and internal bleeding. She was unconscious when we found her. "Anyone else in the car?" I asked. Preparing her four-line, the firefighter shook his head somberly. "A girl, about 8 years old, didn't survive, probably her daughter." A sharp pang of pain hit me in the chest. Accidents involving children were always the hardest. "We need to move her fast," Naomi said, and we worked quickly to get Claire into the ambulance. While Naomi stayed with her in the back, I drove as quickly as I could through the rain to the nearest hospital. Almost 2 hours later, we handed Claire off to the trauma team at the hospital and began preparing to return to the crash site. The doctors weren't hopeful about her condition: severe brain injury, a ruptured spleen, and multiple broken bones. "A terrible night," Naomi sighed as we walked down the hospital hallway. "I hate these kinds of cases," I replied, nodding, "especially when kids are involved." Naomi agreed. "I can't imagine what Claire will feel when she wakes up and learns about her daughter." As we passed a corridor, I nearly collided with a young girl standing outside an emergency room. I stopped, automatically apologizing, but the girl seemed oblivious to me. She was about 8 years old, wearing pink pajamas, staring intently at the closed door. A cold shiver ran down my spine. She looked so familiar in a way that was unsettling. "Who are you looking for?" I asked gently, kneeling to her level. The girl finally turned to look at me, and another chill ran through me. There was something wrong with her eyes, too sad, too empty for a child. "My mom," she whispered. "My mom's in there." "Who's your mom?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "Claire Thomas," the girl replied. "Emma." My heart sank. Emasha had died in the crash, the same girl the firefighter had mentioned. Naomi's voice echoed from behind me. "Who are you talking to?" I turned to find Naomi looking at me with confusion. When I looked back, the girl was gone. I didn't know what to say, and for a moment, I was speechless. "Nothing," I said, forcing a smile. "I think I need a break." Naomi looked at me with concern but didn't press further. The rest of the shift passed in a blur, and I couldn't stop thinking about the little girl, the sadness in her eyes, the way she stood outside her mother's room. In all my years as an EMT, I had seen strange things, but this was the first time I felt certain I had spoken to a spirit, a memory. I wasn't sure what to call it. 3 days later, I returned to the hospital. I checked on Claire, who was still alive, though in a coma. I wasn't sure why I was there, perhaps to see if Emma would return, or maybe to reassure myself that Claire wasn't completely alone. Claire's room was quiet, with only the steady beep of the heart monitor filling the silence. She lay motionless, her head wrapped in bandages connected to several tubes and wires. There were no flowers, no cards. Maybe her family hadn't come, or worse, maybe they were all gone. As I was about to leave, I saw Emma standing by her mother's bed, gazing at her with a sorrowful expression. "Emma," I called softly. She looked up, clearly surprised to see me. "Can you see me?" she asked. I nodded and stepped into the room, closing the door behind me. "I saw you in the hallway a few days ago," I said. Emma nodded, glancing back at her mother. "Not many people can see me," she replied. "Do you understand what happened to you?" I gently asked. "I died," she answered matter-of-factly, her voice devoid of any emotion. "I don't remember what happened during the accident. All I recall is heavy rain, the sound of metal crashing, and then my mom shouting my name. I swallowed hard, struggling to maintain my composure. "You're still here because of your mom," I said. Emma nodded, her gaze lingering on her mother. "I can't leave. Not now. Not while she's like this," she said softly. "The doctors are doing everything they can," I reassured her, though I wasn't sure how to comfort a child who had already passed. "She's strong," I added. "She doesn't want to be strong anymore," Emma replied, her voice filled with understanding. "She wants to be with me." A cold chill ran through me. "What are you saying, Emma?" I asked. "Can you hear what your mom is thinking?" She nodded. "Right now, in her dreams, she knows I've gone, and she doesn't want to live without me. She's trying to find me." I felt a wave of unease. "But you're here," I said. "Not here," Emma whispered, shaking her head and gesturing to the air around her. "I'm really here now, and she's trying to come to me." I glanced at Claire, who lay motionless in bed. The doctors had reported that her condition was worsening, as though she no longer had the will to fight. "Do you think this is what your mom truly wants?" I asked softly. "To give up her life?" Emma's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at me. "I don't know. I just know she's in so much pain, and I miss her," she said. My heart broke for the child, who had lost everything but still worried about her mother. "But do you think your mom would want to keep living for you?" I asked. "To share your story with others so they remember you." Emma thought about this. "Maybe, but she'd be so lonely." "Not necessarily," I said, hesitating before adding, "there are many people who will be there to help her." I paused, unsure whether I should say more. "If you stay somehow, your mom will never truly lose you." Emma looked at me, then back at her mother. "I don't know if I can stay forever. I feel like there's somewhere I need to be." I nodded, understanding. "Maybe just for a little while, enough to help her wake up, to let her know you're okay." A strange, almost translucent tear rolled down Emma's cheek. "How can I make her understand that she can't see me?" she asked softly. "Sometimes, people can feel the presence of those they love, even if they can't see them," I said gently. "Maybe you can let her know that way." Emma seemed unsure but nodded. "I'll try. I'll stay until she wakes up. I'll help her." I smiled, trying to hide the sadness. Emma studied me, curious. "Who are you? Why can you see me?" "My name is Mason," I replied. "I was the one who helped get your mom to the hospital after the accident. As for why I can see you, I'm not sure. Maybe I just have different eyes." Emma gave me a small, bittersweet smile. "Will you come back?" she asked. "I promise I will," I assured her, and I kept that promise. Every day after my shift, I visited Claire. Sometimes Emma was there, sometimes she wasn't. When she was, we talked about her mother, her life before the accident, and sometimes about where she thought she'd go when her time came. A week after my first visit, something miraculous happened. Claire's condition started improving. At first, it was just small changes, stronger heartbeat, better response to stimuli. Then, on the 10th day, she opened her eyes. I wasn't there when it happened, but Emma told me later, her voice filled with joy. "Mom saw me!" she exclaimed, almost jumping with excitement. Just for a second, when she woke up, I was holding her hand, and she looked right at me and called my name. That was wonderful news. I smiled, genuinely happy for both of them. Then the nurse came in, and Claire couldn't see Emma anymore. Emma's face saddened a little, but she seemed at peace. "It's okay," she said softly. "She knows I'm still here." In the weeks that followed, Claire continued to recover at an astonishing rate, leaving the doctors in disbelief. I kept visiting, though I had to be more cautious now that Claire was conscious. It was hard to explain why a paramedic would visit a patient so often. Emma was still there, though she seemed to fade a little more with each visit, becoming less tangible, less visible. Sometimes, I had to look very closely to see her standing in the corner, watching her mother with a mix of love and sadness. 1 month after the accident, I visited Claire again. This time, she was sitting up in bed, strong enough to talk. Most of her wounds had healed, though a long scar on her forehead remained as a reminder of the crash. Mason, she smiled as I entered. My favorite rescuer. Hello, Claire, I said, smiling back. You look so much better. Thank you for always coming to visit, she said gently. The nurses say you come almost every day. I shrugged. I just want to make sure you're okay. Claire looked at me for a long moment, then lowered her voice. Do you see the girl? My heart skipped a beat. What girl? My daughter. Claire's voice cracked. I know it sounds crazy, but sometimes I feel like she's here in this room. And the day I woke up, I swear I saw her. I swallowed, unsure how to respond. I glanced over Claire's shoulder and saw Emma standing there, nodding at me, as if encouraging me to speak the truth. I believe you, I said finally. In fact, I've seen her. Tears filled Claire's eyes. Really? You didn't just say that to make me feel better? I shook my head. I really saw her. She's been here with you this whole time, helping you recover. Claire burst into tears, but I could tell these weren't just tears of grief. There was a sense of relief in them. Is it okay? She asked through her sobs. Is she okay? She's very brave, and she loves you deeply. I reassured her. Claire whispered, I was ready to give up, but when I knew Emma had gone, I didn't want to live anymore. But then, I felt her here, urging me to keep going, like she still needed me to stay alive. I nodded, a tear slipping down my own cheek. I think that's exactly what she wanted. Claire wiped her eyes. Do you think I'll ever see her again? Or feel her presence? I looked at where Emma stood. She was more transparent than ever, almost invisible, but her face was full of love as she gazed at her mother. I'm sure you'll see her again, I said. Maybe not in the way you expect, but she'll always be with you. Emma smiled at me, and in that moment, she seemed to shine brighter, as if illuminated from within. She raised her hand in a silent farewell and slowly faded away until she was gone. I knew, in some inexplicable way, that Emma had finally gone to where she truly belonged. She had completed what she needed to do here, ensuring her mother would continue to live, continue to love. I continued visiting Claire in the months that followed, though less often as she grew stronger. A year after the accident, she was well enough to return to work. 2 years later, I received a card from her announcing the founding of a nonprofit organization named Emma, dedicated to helping families who had lost loved ones in car accidents. Emma never appeared again, at least not in the way I could see her. But sometimes, when I visited Claire, I could feel a strange warmth in the air, as if someone was smiling at us from afar. And in those moments, I knew that Emma was still watching over us, still the eternal witness to a mother's love. The 13th story. There are rescue calls that bring tears, others that make you laugh with their oddities, and some that leave you believing there's something bigger at play in the world pieces of a larger picture we only glimpse occasionally. For me, the story of Mrs. Miller and her cat falls into the latter category. I had been working for about 9 years when I first encountered Mrs. Miller. It was a peaceful spring morning, and I was working with Gabriella, a young nurse who had been on the job for less than a year. We had just completed our overnight shift reports and were getting ready to hand over the shift when the call came in. Engine 27. We have a call from the senior living complex, Sunnyville, apartment 3, Hambu. Female, 89, has fallen, possibly a hip fracture. Code 3. Gabriella sighed as she quickly stashed her jacket into her bag. A hip fracture? Just what I need to end a 12-hour shift, she said. This will be like a morning workout. I chuckled. I'd rather be doing yoga, she muttered, but smiled nonetheless. The Sunnyville Senior Complex was a large, well-maintained facility for retirees located in the southern part of the city. Thankfully, it had a working elevator. The building manager met us in the lobby and quickly led us to the apartment. This is Mrs. Miller, the manager explained as we walked down the hallway. She lives alone with her cat. A neighbor heard her cries about an hour ago and called us. How has she been living alone for so long? Gabriella asked, clearly concerned. I went to check on her as soon as I got the call, but she wouldn't let me call an ambulance right away. She insisted on finding her cat first. The manager sighed. I searched everywhere but couldn't find it. Eventually, I convinced her to let me call you guys. I nodded. It wasn't uncommon for elderly people to worry more about their pets than themselves. For many, those four-legged companions are their only remaining family. The apartment was warm and filled with natural light, its soft yellow walls adorned with numerous potted plants. Everywhere were black and white photos, most depicting smiling faces from a bygone era. Mrs. Miller, a petite woman with neatly tied white hair, was lying on the living room floor. A small pillow had been placed under her head. She was awake, her eyes bright, though her wrinkled face showed signs of pain. "Oh, you two finally made it," she said as we walked in, her voice surprisingly strong for someone of her age. "I'm so sorry for the trouble." "There's nothing to apologize for, Mrs. Miller," I reassured her as I knelt beside her while Gabriella began checking her vital signs. "We were told you fell," I said. "Yes, it was a silly thing," she sighed. "I was reaching for a book on a high shelf and lost my balance. I should have known better. At my age, I shouldn't be climbing anymore." "Where does it hurt?" Gabriella asked, having checked her pulse and blood pressure. "On my left hip," Mrs. Miller replied. "I can move without pain, but it doesn't matter as much as Oscar. Have you found Oscar?" She looked over our shoulders, her face filled with worry. "Oscar is her cat, right?" I asked. The manager nodded, his face filled with concern. "I've searched, but no luck." Mrs. Miller's anxiety was palpable. "Oh no, you have to find him. He never goes outside. I'm afraid he might be stuck somewhere or hurt." "We'll keep looking," the manager promised as he exited the room, but Mrs. Miller still needed medical attention. "I can't go without knowing Oscar is safe," she insisted. "Mrs. Miller," I said gently, "I think you've fractured your hip, and we need to get you to the hospital for x-rays and possibly surgery. The longer we wait here, the worse it could get." "I understand," she replied, tears welling up in her eyes. "But you don't understand. Oscar is my only companion. Albert passed away last year, and before him all my friends left one by one. Oscar is the only family I have left." My heart tightened as I heard her words. "Describe Oscar to me," I said. "I'll find him." Her eyes brightened. "Oh, thank you. He's a big black cat with a small white spot under his chin. Very old, 19 years. He's a little scruffy and tends to hide from strangers." Gabriella raised an eyebrow at me, but I knew she understood. "Can you get her ready for transport?" I asked. "I'll search quickly. Don't take more than 5 minutes." I nodded, then began my search around the apartment. Closets, under the bed, behind the fridge, everywhere a scared cat could hide. But there was no sign of Oscar. After about 4 minutes, I returned to the living room, where Gabriella had given Mrs. Miller pain relief and was preparing her for the stretcher. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller," I said. "I couldn't find Oscar." Sorrow was etched on her face. "Oh no, what will happen to him?" "I'm sure he'll show up," the manager added. "Cats are good at hiding. I'll keep looking and call you when I find him." Mrs. Miller wasn't convinced, but she allowed us to move her onto the stretcher. Just as we began to lift her, a faint meow echoed from somewhere in the apartment. "Oscar!" Mrs. Miller cried out, her face lighting up. It was Oscar. I knew it was still here. I looked around, trying to locate the source of the sound. It seemed to be coming from an old wooden wardrobe in the corner of the living room, a large antique piece I had already checked earlier. The noise was coming from the wardrobe, so I moved toward it. But I had already examined all the drawers, the manager had pointed out. I knelt down and took a closer look. Yes, I had gone through all the drawers, but now I noticed something I had missed before. A small, loose panel at the bottom of the wardrobe, as though it was covering an empty space. I thought it might be hidden behind that panel. I carefully pried it open, and sure enough, behind the panel was a small, dark space, where an old black cat with a white spot under its chin was curled up. It looked at me with wide yellow eyes, clearly frightened but uninjured. "Oscar!" I called softly. "Come here, buddy." The cat hesitated but slowly moved from its hiding place, and I gently picked it up. It tensed but didn't resist as I carried it to Mrs. Miller. "Oscar!" she cried, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Oh, thank God you found him." I carefully placed the cat on her chest and it immediately curled up there, purring as she stroked it. "Oscar, it's so good to have you back," she whispered to him. "I'm so glad you're safe." "We couldn't take the cat to the hospital with her," Gabriella explained quietly. Mrs. Miller's smile faded a bit. "I know, but at least I know he's okay now," she said, looking to the manager. "Could you help me take care of Oscar? He needs his medication." "Don't worry," the manager reassured her. "I'll make sure Oscar gets the care he needs while you're away." "Who's going to give him his meds?" Mrs. Miller asked, concerned. "He has to take heart medication every morning." "I'll make sure it's done," the manager promised. "I used to be a veterinary technician before I became building manager." This seemed to comfort Mrs. Miller. She kissed Oscar once more before allowing the manager to carefully carry him away. As we drove to the hospital, Mrs. Miller told us about Oscar, how she and her husband Albert had adopted him from a rescue shelter when he was just a kitten, and how he had been with them for 19 years. "He used to sleep next to Albert every night when he was sick, as though he knew Albert needed him," she said. "And after Albert passed, he became my wonderful companion." 19 years is quite an impressive age for a cat, I remarked. "Yes, Mrs. Miller said, her smile bittersweet. "The vet said every day with him now is a gift. He has a heart condition, just like Albert." When we arrived at the hospital, Mrs. Miller held my hand as we helped her from the ambulance into the emergency room. "Thank you for finding Oscar," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "You don't know how much that means to me." "It's no problem," I smiled. "I'm just glad I could help." 3 days later, I heard that Mrs. Miller had successfully undergone hip replacement surgery and was recovering well. I decided to visit her after my shift, bringing a small bouquet of flowers. When I arrived at her hospital room, I was surprised to find her crying softly, holding a piece of paper tightly in her hand. "Mrs. Miller?" I called gently from the door. "Can I come in?" She looked up, quickly wiping her eyes. "Oh, Mason, come in." I set the flowers down and sat by her bed. "Are you okay?" "They said the surgery went really well." Yes, my new hip will be fine." She nodded. "But I just got some bad news about Oscar." "Oh no, Mrs. Miller, I'm so sorry," I said, genuinely feeling for the elderly woman. "The manager said he passed away in his sleep," she continued, her voice trembling. "At least he wasn't in pain. But I just wish I could have been there with him." I took her hand, unsure of how to comfort her. "You know, the strangest thing happened," Mrs. Miller said after a long silence. "Albert, my husband, he always said that when the time came for him to go, he'd make sure I was never alone. He promised me he'd send someone to look after me." I nodded, thinking this was the kind of promise people in love often make. "I always thought Oscar was how Albert kept that promise," she went on. "That Oscar was sent to make sure I wasn't alone. To make sure I came to the hospital instead of trying to deal with a broken hip by myself." She then opened the piece of paper in her hand, looking at me with a strange expression. "The manager said the vet examined Oscar to confirm his cause of death. It was heart disease, just like we thought. But they found something odd." She paused, staring at me. "Oscar didn't have the white spot under his chin." I frowned. "But the cat I found had the white spot." Mrs. Miller nodded. "I saw it too. We both saw it. But when the vet examined Oscar's body, there was no white spot, just pure black fur." A cold chill ran down my spine. "Maybe it was a mistake," I suggested, wanting to find a reasonable explanation. But a part of me, the part that had seen too many inexplicable things in my job, wondered if Mrs. Miller might be right. "Do you have a photo of Oscar?" I asked quietly. "A picture of him?" "Yes," she said gently. "There's an old photo of him and Albert." She reached for the photo frame on the bedside table and handed it to me. It was an old photo of a tall man holding a black cat. And sure enough, there it was. The white spot clearly visible under the cat's chin, just like the one on the cat I had found behind the wardrobe panel. I didn't know how to explain it. I don't know what to say, I admitted. You don't have to explain everything, Mrs. Miller said, gently patting my hand. Sometimes we just have to believe. And I believe Albert and Oscar are watching over me. When I left the hospital, I couldn't help but think about what Mrs. Miller had said about Oscar, and the white spot that existed and didn't exist, about promises kept from beyond the grave. As a medical professional, I had been trained to seek logical explanations. But after nearly a decade working on the ambulance, I had learned that sometimes the most miraculous things can't be explained by science. Sometimes love transcends death, and sometimes a cat is not just a cat, but a reminder that we are never truly alone.